y'all, never mind me.
Hey everybody, I was thinking about a scenario when I was at work the other day. Um, let's say you happen to work for a company that handles parking citations. Your company just processes the paperwork, and all you do is you see the tickets come in, and you notice in a certain area that you get a lot of tickets. So you decide to do a little investigation, and you find out in this particular area that you can't park in a certain zone. And if you park there, you can get fines from $10 to $100, we'll say. And you look at your tickets and you see a number of tickets there. You see some for $10, some for $12, and then you see a huge block of tickets for $100. $100 here, big number of tickets, but only a few for the lower end. So nothing too wrong about that, because you park in that parking space, you run the risk of getting a ticket from $10 to $100. Now, as you process those, you have to take the information down to, let's just say you have to take it down to the court, because the judge wants to see the tickets for whatever reason. He wants to see the processing paperwork, and you hang around in the courtroom, and you happen to see that all of the people who got $100 tickets happen to be minorities, all of them. And the people who happen to get the $10 or $11 tickets happen to not be. Not particularly damning, because you run the risk, like I said, the parking says, a fine from $10 to $100. So you run the risk of getting a ticket for $10 to $100. But here's the rub, and why I was thinking about it. Because as a person of color, if I came across that information, that would ring a red flag for me. And people would say that, oh, you're being too sensitive. They all have an equal chance of getting a ticket that could range from $10 to $100. And they'd be absolutely correct. But the fact that the higher ticket values were given to the black people would raise a red flag for me. So I'd look a little further, and I'd say, what is the reasoning behind just the black people getting a ticket? And people would argue that, oh, you're being too sensitive again, you're reading more into it than what there really is. And they could be right. On surface, they could be right. And let's say we do a little bit more research and find out that all the tickets were written by the same individual. All the citations were issued by the same individual. And this individual happened to, doesn't matter if this person was black or white. This we'll call this person, he happened to be black. So he wrote all these tickets, and he happened to be black. So from that standpoint, is there anything wrong there? I'd say, as a person of color, that if we investigate this issue, I'm positive that we'd find wrong, because it just doesn't have that just doesn't ring as circumstance. Like, oh, it just happened to, be just the black folks. Oops, it could happen. And other people might see it differently. And I think just that the thought process along those lines kind of is the reason why I wanted to kind of make a post about it, because it rings, that's how racism kind of works for me in thinking about it. Because I think people have the idea that racism is just some crazy looking dude, in dirty clothes, yelling to the top of his lungs, "Get out of here, boy, and take your clothes, and we don't want your kind," and all that type of stuff. And burning crosses, and, spitting when they talk, and all that stuff. And I think that sort of over the top theatrical comedic racist is what we can identify as racism. And I remember as a kid, they used to have the neighborhood watch signs used to have a picture of a silhouette of a burglar with a trench coat on and a top hat like a cat burglar, and people really thought that that's what a burglar looks like, and unless you're dressed in that exact outfit, you are not a burglar. And I think it's the exact same way because people don't seem to understand, and it keeps resonating with me, that the laws and ordinances are not biased, but the people that enforce them can be. Now, in the case of the parking space issue, that's a valid law. Don't park in this area, or you run the risk of getting a ticket from $10 to $100. Nothing wrong with that, but the enforcement of it, that's where there comes a problem. Because if just one group of people are getting the maximum penalty and the other people are getting the minimum, that's a problem. And you would say, well, okay, well, why don't they just change the sign to say a flat rate? Your ticket, if you park here, your ticket is going to be $50. Boom. Then everybody gets a ticket and everybody's ticket is $50. And I hear you. And perhaps that would be seemingly the way to go. But then what happens with that bias is some people get no ticket at all and others get the 50. And that's the tricky part, because that bias now makes it seem like there's a problem with the law, when the actuality is the problem is with the person enforcing it. And that's how it feels with racism. It's not as ugly on the surface anymore. It's very subversive. It's things like that. Like, oh, you got a ticket, you shouldn't have parked there. Okay, I hear you. But there were lots of other people there who didn't get a ticket. So that bias, that bias is problematic, and the bias stems from somewhere. And I know people will say, well, everyone has a bias. Yes, they do. But when your bias directly impacts me and can cause me harm, physical or otherwise, we have a problem. And I think that's what we need to investigate. We need to investigate. And how do you solve the issue, of bias in a situation like that? Well, you put up automated meters. That way, the meter goes off, boom. If you park there, you get a ticket. Or put cameras. Like they have the speeding cameras. Boom. Cameras are not biased, they just enforce the law. Boom. No problem. So it's a weird thing, because I've seen and heard, and I can understand the argument saying that, well, just don't park there, you won't have those problems. Very interesting. But that doesn't solve the problem at all. The problem still persists. I just don't have to be a part of it at that time. Now, let's say that parking thing got spread even further. Spread all over to where it's all over your community. You have to, it's that same sort of bias that made up the codes that said that free black people at one point in time in history had to be employed somewhere. You can't be unemployed, or you can be sent to prison. You can be arrested and subsequently convicted and sent to prison, which would then make you akin to being in slavery because of the treatment. And even that, people have take umbrage because, well, it's not slavery. You shouldn't have did the crime. You should, and it seemingly sounds like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You shouldn't have did the crime. Da, 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 da. But in those cases, you never committed a crime. It was the bias finding whatever loose means to get you, to put you in that system. And it's easy to say if people aren't hunting for you. when people have that bias and they begin to hunt for you, no matter what you do, they'll find something. And people say, oh, no, you're just being paranoid. You're being paranoid. This doesn't happen. No one is hunting for you. It's happened. And the reason I think of it along those terms is because even at my job, while it's not in the case of, it's not along the lines of being punished judicially, on my job, I've seen people target individuals and build a case loose as they want just to get you in position where they could possibly do real harm. And that's how subversive racism is now. It's not the burning crosses on your lawn. It's not the yelling, go home, boy. It's not that. That would never fly. But it's that insidious, I set a law just meant to try to get you within its parameters. Whether or not you did it or not, I want to get you within the parameters and then take advantage of you one way or the other. And it's interesting because it's up for lots of debate, but your humanity is what is called into question. Because laws are not created to play gotcha to people. Laws are created to establish a rule of conduct. It's more of a culture building, a culture crafting, if you will, to establish an agreed upon set of rules of conduct for everyone. And if they are enforced in a biased way and supported all the way up the chain, then you don't have to say, boy, go home, get off this land. You've said it already by how these are handled. Because it's one thing if I, as the citation issuer, have a bias and I enforce that bias against you, but once it's reinforced when it gets above me, then that makes the whole system complicit in my bias. And a complicit bias with the ability to do harm then becomes something else. So those were just my thoughts. All right.